What's going on, everybody? It's Jay Wilson with episode 2 of Tankin with Steph and Jay. Before we dive into the question, check out last week's video, 15K super mega giveaway. Awesome prizes, back to you, raising money for conservation for African cichlids. You ready? Let's go!
No, I'm not a writer.
Okay.
Alright folks, so the question was asked, should I medicate my fish in quarantine? And although there's going to be many different answers and many different responses throughout the fish hobby, I would seem to think the answer should be no. And here's the reason why. I'm not going to medicate my fish just to medicate them because I think they may have something that they may contract and they may spread. That's like giving your child antibiotics when there's no symptoms, you may think something might happen, and it possibly could happen at some point. So what you're doing is you're putting a lot of stress on those fish, and you're building up an immunity to something that could possibly go wrong. And that's how you develop superbugs. Too many times I see a lot of fish retailers or stores or even local breeders in their garage, they're creating these superbugs because the fish cannot shake the disease with any sort of medication that is available. And the other thing that goes into it is what medication for what's going on. Most of us have no idea even what really ick looks like when it presents itself. Sometimes we confuse it with a little nick on one of our fish's scales. So how do we know which medication to use at the right time when we don't see the symptoms of what we want to treat? Does that make sense? So when you get fish in from your reputable institution that you're bringing in fish from, get them in a quarantine tank and just watch them. If they present some sort of issues, then medicate based upon the presence of those issues. All right, Steph, what do you think?
So most fish keepers find that it's good practice to have a quarantine tank set up so that if you do bring home new fish, you can take the time to observe them and possibly medicate them before introducing them to your show tank or to other tank mates that you already have. So I personally do not like to medicate fish while they're in quarantine, and here's why. First and foremost, I don't buy sick fish if I can help it. I know there are situations where we rescue fish from unpleasant situations and we want them to be healthy and we want them to thrive, and that's great. But normally I'm not going to spend my money on a fish that doesn't look the way that it should. So that's number one. Number two, fish are in very stressful situations in stores. They're likely in smaller tanks than they should be. They might be with inappropriate tank mates. They've been moved a lot, netted a lot. So they're very stressed out when you get them home. So I think it's really important to get them good, clean water that's well aerated and that's appropriate for the type of fish that you have. And then give them some time to settle in and see how they look. I don't think that it makes sense to throw the kitchen sink at a fish as soon as you get it because there's not really a lot of benefit, in my opinion, in prophylactic measures. And if you're not medicating for something the fish actually has, you're just adding more stress onto their immune system, which isn't going to help them in the long run. So if you get into a scenario where you have a fish, it's in a nice clean quarantine tank, and after a couple days it starts looking worse instead of better, then I think the next steps are to document all of the symptoms that you see and do your research to figure out what could potentially be wrong. If I'm going to medicate, I want to make sure I know what I'm medicating for, that I have the right medication, and that I have the right delivery method. So if a fish has a bacterial issue, I'm not going to treat it with a fungal medicine. It doesn't make any sense. And I'm not a huge fan of combining a bunch of medicines because you're not 100% certain how they interact in all scenarios. And again, it's just more stress on the fish. And you got to remember that if a fish has a weakened immune system, something that might seem obvious to you, like a bacterial issue, might just be a side effect of maybe a parasitic issue. So it's really important for you to take in all the information that you possibly can before you medicate your fish. And then even when you medicate your fish in quarantine and they start looking better and they're eating and everything's great, it doesn't mean that when you introduce them into the tank that there's not going to be another issue. I had loaches that I quarantined for 8 weeks and everything was fine, everything was great. I put them in the main tank. All of a sudden everybody's got ick. So the stress alone can cause issues even if you're positive that nothing's wrong with the fish when they go into the tank. So that's my 2 cents, and thanks for checking it.